Hey guys, just out here working on some nets, and I uh, I ended up sharing some stuff about house church from that Lutheran study Bible this morning, and it was interesting. It's there. If is not all the study Bibles, and a lot of commentaries have that myopia about the nature of that early house church and how many of them were just these small groups or whatever. But the Lutheran note that I shared in the post you see before this, I started typing up a bunch of stuff, and it's just like typing takes forever. Audio goes faster, and yeah, I'm not slick and polished. So I had a story I wanted to tell about the New Brunswick House Church Network, and a couple of stories that I'll share anyway. And frosty morning, it's minus 17 here today. It's our coldest night we've had this winter. But we've had an incredible winter snow-wise and whatever else anyway. But so we can't complain. And Shane White's coming up today for a few days visit. Got delayed yesterday for the snowstorm and stuff. So looking forward to having Shane come. Shane, if you see this, safe travels up today, brother. Going to set up a table for you in the workshop so you have your own place to study and read and whatever. And we can watch some videos and chat. We can even do a podcast if you want to together or whatever. That'd be fine. Looking forward to whatever the Lord wants us to do together, because goodness knows we need the encouragement today. But anyway, when I was talking about the house churches and how the Lutheran Bible from Concordia had a good note there that I shared. Fits the context well, but I want to tell you that story about New Brunswick. And New Brunswick was, they had at the time, I'm going to talk about one area in New Brunswick that where there was house churches, and because this is not the full of New Brunswick, because there's many hundreds and hundreds more, but in around the Fredericton area there was a network of house churches at around 78, and that was a decade ago, about a decade ago when this kind of unfolded. The churches were there long before that. Some of them were long time, like 30-year-old house churches. They were doing house churches before anybody even knew what that was. And so real groundbreakers in that sense, not discovering something new but restoring something old. And these churches were going and growing, and more of them happened. They get up to about 78, and then a young couple got involved in them, loved it, grew in it, but they came out of a big church background where they played in church bands, sang the big tent songs, like we have today, and they were quite talented and skilled in being able to lead those kind of things. And of course, there's nothing wrong with that. That's perfectly wonderful. Praise God for their gifts, right? So anyway, they finally come up with the idea, because they had a few like-minded, especially when you get young people new people into house church movements. And I still go through it. There's days where I wonder, why do I do this? It would be so much easier just to pack up and go back to that. Why do this? And, and then there are people who miss certain things about big church, and there's nothing wrong with big church in that sense. But, they decided, they had asked all of these churches that naturally cross-pollinated without the big church event. And this is the thing that I think is a context of the Corinthian church, which is very strong. Is that it definitely was a bunch of house churches across the city, but we see that from time to time they were getting together at a larger venue to cross-pollinate, share the Lord's Supper together, sometimes share a love feast or whatever. And so that absolutely is there. So it is a very biblical concept to have the idea that house churches will get together at a larger gathering at points. So you have to grant that. I have to grant that. And in granting that, I would say that big mega churches or large churches that have their Sunday gathering would, but as long as they emphasize small groups, and because they understand that's where a lot of the growth takes place. And the big group gatherings we have today are missing many elements of the New Testament practice of the church, which is you can't practice one another's in a big assembly. And not everybody participates in a big assembly. And I don't care who you are, we have to acknowledge those weaknesses of what we're doing. And if we can compensate for it in small groups in another place, that's excellent. But I think we have a dismal record at having people see the importance of the small groups versus the big groups, and not understanding the weaknesses and the slow growth that can happen in people's lives without the small groups. And so I push back on it for that reason. But like I say, I'm for all things as long as it grows people. And so this couple decided, well, they wanted to be able to lead worship, music, and band and whatever. So they challenged the network, which were already meeting together. One house church would invite another house church to cross-pollinate them from time to time, or two, or three, whatever a house could happen. That was happening naturally between the 78 groups. So they were connecting with each other in this organic, natural way. They didn't have to create an event to do it. It was a simple invitation. Come and join us for a Sunday. And they would join each other's churches for a Sunday. And so that network was connected. That network was cross-pollinating. That network was recognizing the broader unity of the church movement in that area. And so that, I point that out just to say you don't have to have the hub mentality in order to foster that. And I think that that's more the Corinthian context than the mega church with small groups context. I see cross-pollinating churches, a half a dozen, or whatever, and or a dozen in Corinth. And so they started doing this. They asked if they could start doing this Sunday evening thing once a month, and they started doing it, and everybody started to join. And not everybody, whoever wanted to join would go. And some enjoyed it and thought it was great and wanted to keep doing that. Others never saw the value of it. We're already cross-pollinating anyway, so why create yet another event to demand time and demand structure and work from people that isn't necessary, because it was happening without creating this Sunday night structure once a month. But the couple enjoyed it, and others, new in the movement, enjoyed it because whatever reason, and then eventually they present it to the network. Well, let's do it every Sunday evening. And we're not trying to impose a structure on the house church, just for those who feel they need it. And they, and the house church blessed it, and not that they needed their permission, but people went who voluntarily wanted to go, and then the next thing it started off slow, but then they were having 60 or 70, and then they wanted to go to every Sunday night, and they had 60 or 70, and then they pushed the house church network about let's have it Sunday morning. And now it's become a thing that was in competition with what was happening in the homes on Sunday morning. And then eventually around that time, where that monthly gathering to sing live big band church type stuff and have someone speak on the stage happen, around that transition time to that conversation starting, and then a year later to 1 week, and then shortly after that to let's take it to Sunday morning, there was this drive to form an official network. And again, not because there was any criticisms of the house church cross-pollination. It was working. It was just something different. That's all that some people felt that they wanted. And so this is when they formed a network that was called the 24/7 network. And so it became a little more of a formal thing. Some house churches recognized it, some didn't. Some participated, some didn't. Half of some house churches participated, half of the group in a house church didn't. So, there was nothing mandatory in it and nothing necessarily wrong with it. And but anyways, they tried for about 3 years to do this network thing, 24/7 network, and then basically it got to the point where a lot of the people just started looking at each other and saying, this is just more of the same thing that we came out of, that we grew up in. And it took about 2 years. And I know one particular gentleman that was very active in that, and great fella. Lost touch with him. I've never met him person to person. He's a Facebook connection with me, and eventually, I think it really frustrated him, and he was very much in the small group thing. And then eventually, he just stepped out of that altogether, and then took a small church in a rural church in some area. And he's not doing it like a traditional church necessarily, although it looks very traditional and it's in the building and stuff. But anyway, I think that network idea just about killed him. And that's the thing. I don't have a problem. I can see it as being biblical, having a hub place where house churches can get together, kind of like Corinth did. But I don't think it was nearly as formal and structured. And we North Americans, I don't know if we are even able to understand what happened there. We want to make it into something that it doesn't need to be, is how I feel about it. And so the house churches just went back to doing what they did before. And some of those ones that were really missing that big band gathering thing, which there isn't much of a stage place for that in a house church, is there? And there isn't many, having a big band with a small, with a dozen people, just doesn't create the atmosphere that some people long to have, does it? I don't care who you are, you can't recreate that there. So some of those folks just went back to churches. Not a lot of them, but the ones that kind of initiated this. And anyway, and so the churches went back to cross-pollinating, doing what they needed to grow one another. And the 78 churches eventually ended up connecting with each other, well aware of each other, blessing each other, and that house church network carried on. But this is the drive. Even I remember a couple of years ago, I reread some of the more modern church books the last 5 years. I bought everything that was on Amazon. There was 8. I think there was about 8 or 9 new ones. And all but one of them basically promoted this idea of house churches. And that doesn't surprise me, because some people in the institutional and traditional churches are sitting up and taking notice of the strength of what's happening in house churches. But they're bringing some of that structure to it now. But some of it, that cross-pollination is biblical. It's how it looks. We got to do some more digging on. Okay? I think it's biblical. It's there in 1 Corinthians. And then the other story is a church planter was doing a big church plan and wanting to rent a place to start and launch it off, and doing the traditional thing and raising big bucks for it as is done in the North American way. I say American way because we got taught that by the Americans. There was nobody up here came up with that. So, and right or wrong, maybe it's because we're stupid, not because we're more spiritual necessarily. That's not my implication. So he got doing the church, and anyway, nabbed a big band, one that was very popular in churches, and the band decided that they would jump on this new church plant and help. And of course, they were literally a Canadian award band, so they had a flock. They had a bunch of people in the churches that used to come anytime they played anywhere, and wherever they go, a lot of people show up. And so he picked up that band. And that's basically where a lot of the numbers came from, because I think they were up to 70 or 80 at one point, maybe even 100. I don't know. Could have been even a little better than that. But the other thing that helped that house church was he just happened to bump into a guy. I think he was just at a coffee shop or something. He saw that this guy was reading his Bible, and he started talking. Well, it came to find out that the guy was. I don't know, he was some kind of insurance guy or investment guy or something anyway, but a Christian. Not sure that if he was ever in ministry or not, but he started a house church many, like a long time long time before. He just saw people not being challenged and fed and challenged to grow up, through the programs. And eventually over the years, a good number of people joined in with what he was doing. And I think that his group was, it was at least 30. The number 28 sticks in my mind, but I'm thinking maybe even as big as 35, which is pretty big for a house church, you have to admit. I couldn't host 35 here. I could only, even with my workshop here, 25 to maybe 30 at max if we met out here. But in my house, about 20 would be the limit of what I could hold. And anyway, they were doing very well, and the church planter ran into him, and he told him what he was doing. He got all excited and thrilled, and the church planter basically, tried to sell to him that this is going to be a different church. We want this kind of discipleship in our church, so come and bring this ethos into our church plant. And he tried to sell that, and the guy was reluctant and said, well, it just becomes, we end up taking all of our energy to run the Sunday show. No, we're going to be out on the street. And that was around that time the word missional started getting popular. We're going to be missional. We're going to be out doing stuff on mission or whatever. And anyway, again, the word missional was a term hijacked from these simple movements, and it became something that the simple movements never recognized when the institutional church and church growth people took it over. They just rebranded it and reframed it into something else, and eventually notice how you don't see the word missional anymore. So very rarely. And but anyway, he finally sold it to them to go, and the guy went and talked to the people, explained it to them. Some of them were reluctant, some of them were hesitant, and they said, well, as long as discipleship and accountability, and serious study of the Word of God is a part of it, maybe we could do it. They reluctantly agreed they could. And so they, they wanted to know who this church planter was, so they invited the church planter to come. He came several times to the house church and was with them, and participated with them, and then they had the conversations that he wanted to have with them, and anyway, and they said, okay, we'll agree to it. And I don't know for sure if they set a time limit, but my impression is that they did. They said, we'll try this out for a year, and anyway, they did it for a year, and it wasn't too bad, and then eventually, two things led to the collapse of that church plant, and people in the institution church will never know this story because it's not going to get told. And number one is they lost their big famous band and their flock that followed them around, and they went and attached themselves after 2 or 3 years. I think it was at least 2 years, if not 3 years in. I think it was about 2 or 2.5 years. I don't remember. And they attached themselves to another new latest thing. The band went to attach themselves to another new latest thing, church plant thing. And basically they lost so many people. When the band themselves is 8, or 8, well, with their husbands and wives and children, it's probably 15. So, when you in the Maritimes, when you lose a band and their wives and their children, you're losing at least 15 people. So, if not more. And their flock went off to the new church, the new latest thing. And then the other thing, though, that happened before that, some people say that there was a strong woman influence that crashed that church, a Jezebel type situation, which they had that. There was a woman who had some influence that didn't do good, but that wasn't the death blow. The death blow was this band going and a lot of numbers leaving. And then the other death blow was all of these people in this house church group, this 30 or so-ish, plus or minus a little bit, they started to look at each other, and they were right back to where they were 20 years before. Burned out, the church trying to do too much, do this, do something for the poor. We got to do this as a church, and let's go out and pick up garbage, and all good stuff. And then the depth of the teaching went down, the amount of time people had to devote to assembly of the saints for the purposes of the saints was being crushed, because they had to be out focusing on this stuff, which is good. Evangelism is great, and we can become inward in house churches, and church plants, and we got to fight against that. I'm not going to deny that for a minute, but anyway, they've just said, we've got no time left. We're exhausted. The new church plant was relying heavily on them to teach the classes and lead the small groups and do these things, because they were the mature ones. And after a year, the house church group met with their former leader of their group and started to express their discontent. And he went to see the church planter and talked to them about it, and and he pushed back. Oh, it's okay. Well, we hear it, we acknowledge it. We're going to correct it, and they did some superficial stuff, but it just didn't happen. And eventually, the leader himself, the people said, "Look, if you're not going to lead us in a house church, we are going to form one or two of our own or whatever without you. Doesn't matter, we don't need you. We appreciate what you did. We're glad that you're sold into what is happening at this church plant. We're not trying to cause trouble. We're not trying to discourage you." But they just said this isn't working. Our kids are not being discipled well, and they felt they were at a critical time in their families that they had to not let that slide any longer. And the leader himself eventually, he himself got to the point where no, and so they left, and not in a bad way, not in a fight, not in a church split way. They just went back to doing what they know worked. And when those 30 people left, that was really the final blow of that church plant. It was not this Jezebel woman. This Jezebel, supposedly a woman who was trying to control things from behind the scenes, might have been the church planter's thorn in the flesh. And he saw it as his main problem, because it was his main problem. He had to deal with that. And it was always in his face, but it wasn't this house church's problem. And when they left, you know what I mean? That was when they went down to just a number of people that couldn't be sustained, and all their workers left. Their Bible study teachers, that was their Sunday school teachers, that was their communion leaders, small group leaders, or whatever. And so it was a death blow that they couldn't recover from, really. And but nobody's ever acknowledged that or pointed that out. So that's just two stories about house churches. How networks can be wonderful, and I think there is a biblical case for that. But how we make those networks may not necessarily reflect what we see in Corinth, because that Fredericton network, they had it happening without that structure, and they were doing very well. They're still doing very well, and I don't know what the numbers are in that kind of Connected 78 group, but that's at least 10 years ago. And they were planting new churches then, and so I know for a fact it's probably 100. I lost touch with it because in the early days I kind of wanted to know more about them and get connected a little bit, because I was feeling very isolated and alone. But I never did it much, just through some of the leaders, particularly the leader that started doing this 24/7 network thing. And it was encouraging at the time, but like him, I was seeing before he was saying that this is becoming something that I never intended it to be. And the tail is starting to wag the dog. And so I stepped back from that movement at that time because of that structure that was there, because I didn't want, I'm not running to New Brunswick. I can't run to New Brunswick. I got to serve and invest my time and work where I'm at. I can't be distracted running to somebody else's thing. And but anyway, just folks, just do what grows people. And I'm not against it, but big churches, and some of you say, "Oh yeah, well it doesn't sound like it." Well, show me something that's growing people, and I'll support it. I'll be a part of that, and I hope and you will be too, and I know you will be too. So anyway, brothers, I just wanted to tell those stories, and it's way too long, and I got to get back to work on doing the funnels. I got the ring stitched in. I have to weave the strings around the funnels that support the shape of the funnel when we guide the strings to pull the shape. The front one is kind of an octagon. The middle one is a rectangle, and you got to hang a rectangle hole suspended in the air with the funnel. So I have to get the strings in them and figure that out. It's a little bit of art to that, as artsy as I get. You guys have a good day, and hope this conversation did some good for you. And pray that I'm an encouragement to Shane. Shane's got some good health problems there right now, and he's a bit discouraged, not just about his health, but the tension of trying to figure out life between Romania and here. I lived that with Molly for 8 years. And what he can do there versus what he can do here, and missing what he did there because it's so slow to make something happen here. I understand where the brother's at. We're going to have some good conversations, but I'm not going to tell you his story. If he ever wants to tell you, he can get on here and tell it himself. Blessings, brothers and sisters.